Whoreson, this classic book by Donald Goings, classic writer from the 70s. The story of a ghetto pimp. Let's go ahead and get into it. Chapter 3.
My eyes opened in surprise. Reaching up with my empty hand, I squeezed her left breast. I ducked my head to miss the blow, if one was coming, before she could move. Tony moved in behind her fast, sticking his hand as high up under her dress as it would go. She screamed, and we ran down the street laughing. Tony yelled to me, "Whoreson, she ain't got no drawers on." People walking down the street stopped and laughed. Big Mama yelled out of the window at us, and the pimps in the car roared with laughter. The other prostitute broke out in a run after us, but when we cut into a gangway that led into an alley, she stopped. After this experience, Tony and I stayed on Hastings. When we were on this street of excitement, everything seemed to happen. Life was full. Perhaps our introduction to vice was premature for our age, but prepared us well for our chosen profession. My mother tried hard during this period to stop me from hanging around pool rooms and trick houses. Her beatings were useless, though. She even tried using coat hangers twisted together. She called them her pimp sticks and used them only when I had been exceptionally bad. Even after she had used coat hangers, I wouldn't stay off the corner. For 2 or 3 days after a severe beating, I would stay close to the house. But when you're young and wild, you soon forget the whippings, or just try not to get caught next time. Tony had started staying at my house 4 nights out of a week, so Jessie whipped him as much as she did me. After I turned 10, she began to see that beatings were not the answer. She discontinued them, except for when we would sneak back out after she went to work. For some reason, she couldn't stand for me to see her working on the streets. At school, our gang had become a terror. We shook down all the kids our age, plus a few of the older ones. We took their lunch money daily, until one day we beat up 2 brothers who had rebelled against our extortion. Their mother came back to the school with the police. The principal informed the officers that Tony and I were the ringleaders. We denied this, but it didn't do any good. The detectives wouldn't believe our lies, so we ended up being escorted home by them. Tony said we were half-brothers and lived together. I think he told this lie to stop them from going to his house, where they might have found narcotics lying around. When the police knocked, Jessie had to get out of the bed to open the door. She just stood there staring at us when the officer pushed us through the door. After listening to the police talk, her eyes began to shoot sparks. We knew there was big trouble ahead. Without answering, Jessie wheeled around and ran to the bedroom. She reappeared swinging her coat hangers. Her large breasts strained to burst free from the sheer nightgown she wore. In her anger, she hadn't bothered to put on one of her housecoats, so the officers could see just about all they desired. They stared with open admiration. Tony was the one she reached first. I was glad of this because I hoped that she would be tired by the time she reached me. As I watched, I began to shiver with fear. She struck with such brutal intensity that I knew Tony wished he had gone home. I'd never seen her like this before. When she released him, he squirmed across the floor in torment. She stood there breathing hard, with her hands on her hips. Her eyes seemed wild. Her features were contorted by rage. I tasted fear for the first time in my life. My mouth was dry. My legs trembled. I stared with fear at this dark, angry woman who I could hardly recognize as my mother. When she moved towards me, I jerked back, breaking the policeman's hold on my arm. Before I could maneuver, my progress was halted by Jessie's unyielding grip. It seemed inflexible. No matter how I wiggled, I couldn't break her hold. The pain was inexpressible. The blows landed first on my back and shoulders, then moved down to my buttocks and legs, then back again. I screamed from sheer pain, mingled with terror. She beat me in such a cold fury, I thought she would kill me. She didn't stop until an officer intervened in my behalf. Seething with anger, she stood over me, her eyes blazing. Her voice was harsh and deadly when she spoke. "If I ever hear tale of you taking money from any kids, I'll beat you to death. Do you understand, boy? Between the whimpers that escaped from me, I managed to nod my head. I believed in my heart that Jessie meant what she said. Before they left, the officers told Jessie it would be ridiculous to whip us again. They must have thought that after the demonstration they had witnessed, the next beating would kill us. Tony and I lay on the floor, side by side. Without speaking about it, we knew our extortion racket had come to a sorry end. 4. Winter came and went. With the coming of summer, Tony and I started dressing neatly every day for the first time in our lives. Tony got a job delivering papers so he could have enough money to buy clothes. His mother shot up all the money she made, so he had to get his own. Jessie bought me anything I wanted, within reason, so I was just about the best-dressed boy in school. One day, just after my 12th birthday, I came home from school and Jessie told me it was time for me to learn my street education. I didn't know what she meant, because I thought I'd been learning about the streets without her knowing it. How utterly wrong I was. While I was eating, she told me she had to make a run, but she would be right back, so stay home. I waited impatiently until she returned. When she got back, she had a tall, dark man with her. I stared at him curiously. Since I had been born, this was the first man she had ever brought back to the house. Whenever Big Mama talked about pimps, she said I was the only pimp Jessie had, or wanted. He was the darkest man I'd ever seen. Actually, he was blue-black, with large red lips. He wore thick round glasses that made him look like an owl. Jessie introduced me to Fast Black. For the first time in my life, I learned that looks could be deceiving. He began teaching me all the connivance that went into the game. Trickology must be used whenever it was impossible to rip it off. Artifice became my Bible, as I learned how to play stuff, the shell game, pigeon drop, and three-card molly. Before I turned 13, I was on my way to becoming a card sharp. With a pair of craps, I was becoming a master. I could knock, shoot the turn down, a pad roll. On sand, dirt, concrete, it didn't make any difference. Wherever they played, I just about had a shot for it. Fast Black used to tell me I could never claim to be good until I could take a pair of dice and get down on a blanket, then walk the dice from 2 to 12 without missing the sequence. My only problem at this time was the hours that Fast Black had me practice. I spent hour after hour in front of a mirror, pulling seconds or dealing cards from the bottom of the deck. When I finished with the cards, I'd have to spend 2 more hours shooting dice on the bed, with the blanket drawn tight. To break the repetition of daily practice, Jessie asked Fast Black to teach Tony how to play. We competed against each other for pennies each day. It wasn't long before we were keeping all the boys at school broke. At lunchtime, you could always find a game going somewhere on the tiny school ground. There was a Greasy Spoon restaurant across the street from the school. Most of the kids gathered there to play the jukebox. The owner, Fat Sam, liked to watch the young girls dance, so the jukebox kept money in it. After school one day, Tony and I saw a crowd gathered in front of the restaurant. Anticipating a fight, we ran over and joined the crowd. Janet, with 3 of her girlfriends, stood in the middle of the crowd singing. I watched her lead the group. Her small hips swayed with the beat of the tune. I knew then I was through pulling her hair in the classroom. A police car pulled up and scattered the crowd. I slipped away from Tony and approached Janet. I removed her books from her arms. She turned and stared, astonished. We were too shy to talk much that first day, but after a few days, she began to ask serious questions. What you gonna do, Whoreson, when you get grown? Pimp, baby, pimp, I would answer. She would shake her head, sadly. Don't you know there's better things in life than that? Why don't you finish school and go on to college? I'm ready for the fast track now, baby. I don't need no college, I replied as cool as possible. She puckered up, and tears rolled down her cheeks. I stopped and pulled her into a doorway. Our lips met for the first time. The kiss tasted salty, but it seemed to stop her from crying, so I kissed her again. After a while, she pushed me back from her. She stared up at me seriously. "We have to stop seeing each other, Whoreson, 'cause I'm going to be a big singer someday, while you ain't gonna be nothing but a pimp." I stared at her, angrily, as she continued, "My mother said singers go with entertainers or businessmen, or prostitutes go with pimps." I looked at her coldly. "My mother told me something too," I said harshly. "When I was 3 years old and in my mother's arms, she looked down at me and said, 'Son, the way I'm taking care of you now, when you get old, I'll always have you a woman to take care of you like this.'" Before she could interrupt, I continued, "Furthermore, before my daddy died, he bought me a graveyard, so that when I got old enough, I could drive my old Cadillacs there and leave 'em." I was talking fast now, 'cause she had hurt me. She started to walk off, but I grabbed her arm. "Before you go, young bitch, I want you to know, you said a pimp ain't nothing, but dig this. All I'm gonna do is rest and dress, buy gasoline and lean. Now can you dig where I'm coming from, young ho? 'Cause that's all you is. I'm gonna buy diamond rings and have the best of everything." I turned her arm loose. "When you get home, tell your mammy for me that I wanted to know, when I get old, I'm gonna pimp hoes." With that said, I turned my back on her and walked off.